first picture is from 1979. It is the old FM studio. This may be the first one that we were in when the Ideas Network started. The next picture is from 1984. That is the old FM studio, which is now where we do ISDN interviews with guests. It was a tiny little room. That's one of the earliest pledge drives. I see Sue Cleary standing at the podium. 1984. The bottom one, oh, I remember this. The FM studio was the last one to be put together. The Ideas Network was the first to be reconstructed. This room had been what we called Studio K when I came to Wisconsin Public Radio at Vilas Hall. It was at that time where UW Roundtable was done. There was a big table in the center with 5 microphones. This is its transition point when they were about to install the first of the FM networks, control rooms with board ops. Well, that's me and Margaret Andreasen when we were the original co-hosts of To the Best of Our Knowledge. That would be 1990. Margaret had been a talk show host at Wisconsin Public Radio for a number of years, a very popular one, very bright woman. She left To the Best of Our Knowledge to go do some work in the Middle East, as I remember. This is much of what was the original staff of To the Best of Our Knowledge after Margaret left. To go through them, Molly Bentley was on with the program. She was a producer. And Strange Champs, of course, was, I think at that point, the executive producer of To the Best of Our Knowledge. I was the host, sole host by then. Marv Nunn in the back was our technical director. Marv is still here in the area. He is retired, but he does a lot of recording for the music service. Debbie Builder was a producer at the same time that Molly was. She went off to Philadelphia. She got married. She has a couple of kids, but she continues, I believe, to work occasionally for WHYY in Philadelphia. Steve Paulson, of course, is now executive producer of To the Best of Our Knowledge, also one of the original team. Mary Lou Finnegan came to us from Plattsburgh, New York, but she had been at NPR for many years before that. She is a producer and tape editor now. Judith Strasser, on the right-hand side, is gone now. She was a producer for this. Prior to that, she was a producer for University of the Air. She was a producer for the Annenberg series. She did a whole series on War and Peace. Very bright woman, a great addition to our staff, who died of cancer just a year and a half ago. This is at the Peabody Awards, the Waldorf Astoria Hotel in New York City. Steve Paulson and me and Ann Strainchamps. I remember the day very clearly because it's an extraordinary thing to win a Peabody Award. I remember that Jon Stewart was at the table next to us. He, of course, didn't notice that we were there. Dan Rather was there that day, that year, I think. It was terrific. Just amazing. This goes back a while. This is the staff who were, this is long enough ago that we were 2 services, but I think only barely. Tom Clark was news director at that time, I think. He's on the back left. He, of course, later became the host of the morning talk show on WPR. Roger Sorrow was, I think, news director. Michael Hansen was the host of Asylum, the jazz program. Mitch Gershenfeld was a split appointment between the UW Music School, where he was the head of the tuba instruction, and he was host of Saturday Morning by Request. He originated that program. Tom Martin Erickson, he was, of course, host of Simply Folk, with, at that point, I think, Becca Pulliam, before Judy Rose was here. Ken Ost was one of the mainstays of Wisconsin Public Radio, perhaps its most recognized voice for many years. He did Etc., he did Jazz Classics, he did Chapter a Day. He was the host of Morning Classics on Wisconsin Public Radio. I'm guessing it's long enough ago that I was the cultural affairs reporter then and host of Art and Soul, the arts magazine, on the weekend. Rhonda Allen, lower left, was a talk show host. Robert Russell was in the music department. He is still living in the Madison area, a composer and musician. Art Oster was with us as an arts producer. He had his own show at the time. Linda Clauder was the music director then, and creator of the program that has become Sunday afternoon at the Chazen. Now it was the Elvium then. Cliff Roberts was the Morning Classics host at that point. He too had been at Wisconsin Public Radio, as Ken had, since the late 1940s. He left for a while to go work in commercial radio in New Orleans, but came back, and by the time I had come here in the late 1960s, he was music director at that point, but he stepped down so that Linda could have the job. He died in 1984. This has to have been even earlier. In the back, Ken Ost, who was chief announcer and also the voice of Chapter a Day, Ernie Engberg, who was married to Mary Lou. Ernie was an engineer, mostly in television, I thought, although he must have done some work in radio as well. Seated from the left, Carl Schmidt, who came here as a student in the 1930s, went away for the Second World War, came back after the war, after he'd spent some time in New York as a radio actor, came back to school, raised his family here. He was, at various times, director of radio, director of the Earplay radio drama project. He was one of the early practitioners of Chapter a Day, and of course now at the age of 88 continues to read for Chapter. Next in line is Jack Steele, who was the chief engineer. He is perhaps more than any other responsible for the creation of the FM network. He put together all of those towers around the state. There were 11, I think, when I came here in 1968. There are 31 now, but in his day. And I'm told he put many of them together with bubble gum, the only way to keep them up. Liz Carlson, I knew quite well. I liked her. She worked in School of the Air. She was a script writer. She worked with Claire Kensler and Carol Cowan. Mary Lou Engberg was the budget director. And Harold McCarty is the best known of them all, certainly in his day. He came to WHA in the late 1920s, early 30s, and was instrumental in the creation of educational radio in Wisconsin, and later in the creation of what's now Wisconsin Public Television as well. Well, this jumps a little bit ahead. On the left, we have Dana Davis-Rem, who was director of radio from 1998 to 2001. She's gone on to NPR, where she is in charge of their station relations, I think. Jack Mitchell on the right worked here briefly in the 1960s after he graduated from the University of Michigan. And I remember him when I was a student here in 1968. I think he was public affairs director then. He left. He went to the BBC. He went to NPR, where he was, in the very early days, responsible with Bill Siemering for the creation of All Things Considered. He was hired here again in 1976, became director, and stayed in that position for the next 20-some years. He hired me as first program director and later associate director. Jack and I worked together for a long time. For the next 20 years, I hope that Wisconsin Public Radio as a whole continues to grow and that we maintain our commitment to the Wisconsin idea. WPR has been, more than anybody else, able to bring the boundaries of the university, first to the boundaries of the state, and now essentially to the world. And as long as we stay in the forefront of that, I think we've done just a fine job.